Welcome to another episode in the Business Ready for Sale podcast series, where we believe that a business that's ready for sale is well worth keeping. My name is John Denton. In today's episode, I'm going to be chatting with Rajiv Rajan, an experienced business broker in the art of selling franchise businesses. A very interesting topic. But first, I need to give credit to a business called Liberty Flexible Workspaces. I recorded this episode of the Business Ready for Sale podcast in Liberty Flexible Workspaces office in St. George's Terrace in Perth. Liberty are Western Australia's largest independent flexible workspace provider. They provide private office space, co-working, virtual office services, and meeting room hire. They deliver cost-efficient facilities, state-of-the-art technology, contemporary interior design, and an epic client experience, creating a world-beating workspace environment for today's businesses. And it's thank you to them for letting us use their podcast recording facility at 197 St. George's Terrace in Perth. You can find out more about Liberty Flexible Workspaces at www.weareliberty.com.au. And so now to today's episode. So welcome, Rajiv.
Thank you, John. Thank you for the invitation to join you today.
Great to have you here. It's an interesting topic, franchises. I was in a training business franchise. It started off as a license arrangement but became a franchise because of the tightening of the franchise laws. And it was a good franchise. And selling it, we went about it all the wrong way when we tried to sell it, and then learnt the right way to do it through a good broker in town, got 20% more for it.
Terrific.
And sold it without any stress and hassle. And that business is still going today. But Rajiv, tell me a little bit about your background and your business and your experience with franchises.
Sure. John, I'm an economist by training. Spent my time at university doing a undergrad and then a postgrad, a master's in economics and finance. I then spent a couple of years in the banking industry in London and then joined the pharmaceutical industry, early 1990s. And I spent almost 20 years in pharmaceuticals, travelled around the world, the UK, Ireland, US, Switzerland, and I arrived here in Perth in 2010 for a 6-month break. And I've been here ever since.
Perth's a bit like that, isn't it?
It's very addictive. It took me a while to adjust, but once I adjusted, it was the perfect setting.
Yeah. So how did you get into business broking?
I spent a year. So I took a 6-month sabbatical to travel, came to Perth, decided at the end of that 6-month period I didn't want to go back to the environment that I was in, that I wanted to be self-employed. I'd held the ambition for a long time, but had a set of golden handcuffs, good salary, good lifestyle, a lot of travel, and a comfortable life. So I spent almost a year looking for a business to buy here, and I struggled. I struggled to get the information that I wanted. I struggled to get the advice that I needed, and I struggled to make a decision because nothing felt right.
It can be a bit like that. And so, yeah, carry on.
So at the end of that period, I'd contacted numerous brokers looking for businesses. And one of them said to me, the kind of questions you're asking me, you'd be better off on this side of the table. Have you thought about broking? And I said, no, I don't know anything about broking. But I'd been in sales environments from banking to pharmaceuticals, managed sales teams and sales managers. So I spent a few months researching that particular franchise. It was a business broking franchise, and I bought the business in late 2011.
Wow!
So I became a franchisee.
Yeah. So you've been in a franchise as well.
I have. I spent five years in franchising, and I think my experience I can best describe as a mix between indulgence and subjugation. Went through the entire period of thinking it was the best thing since sliced bread, and also towards the end feeling like I couldn't find a way to get out. I was trapped.
Yes, it's interesting. I often get phone calls from people saying, I'm buying a business. I've been told you can help me. Okay, so what's the business? And then they name the business, which is a franchise.
Okay.
In a shopping centre quite often.
Yes.
And I say, you're not buying a business, you're getting into a franchise.
Yes.
Because in a franchise, you don't typically own anything. But having said that, it's a good stepping stone to go through a franchise before you start your own business, because you learn so much.
It's a great proving ground. I think it's a great place to learn, particularly if you're selective about the brand that you join, and you join a brand with a proven system, with good support around you, a good network, and ongoing support, not just the initial training, but ongoing support from the franchisor. It can work really well.
Yeah, I mean, I tell people that just like any business, there are good ones and not so good ones.
Look, the burden lies with the buyer here. You really need to do your research. Don't fall in love with a brand until you've done your research, you've spoken to existing franchisees, and not just one or two, but spent your time traveling around and speaking to a cross-section of franchisees to get a holistic picture of that particular business.
That's very good advice, because people do fall in love with the brand, don't they?
They do. I've been through periods. So in my 10 years as a broker, I've seen various brands peak and then trough. And there have been times when I can offer somebody a business that is highly profitable, yet they're happily paid twice as much for another business, which doesn't make as much money because they're in love with the brand. They see the brand as the gateway to fortunes.
Yeah.
As opposed to the business or the business model.
So what else should people do if they're thinking of buying into a franchise? I mean, they do have by law, they've got a period of time to do their due diligence.
Look, I think the simplest and clearest advice I can give to anybody that's considering buying a franchise is take paid professional advice before you sign any documentation. Contact me, contact John, find out the names of franchise experienced accountants, franchise experienced lawyers. Take sound advice. A couple of $1,000s before you invest $500,000 or $1 million is money well spent. It's an investment. Even if you don't proceed, it could save you hundreds of thousands of dollars in the long term.
Absolutely. And it's interesting how many people are reluctant to do that.
I have sat in my office with franchise documents that have been delivered to me by franchisors, 300 pages, 3 copies of. And when the client comes in who's buying that business, I've said, here's the document confirming that you've taken legal advice, accounting advice, and general business advice. And they signed the waiver to say that they were given the option but elected not to. And one particular gentleman, I've never forgotten, I said to him, so have you taken advice on this document? He said, yeah, I have. I said, who did you go to? Which lawyer? Because I'd given him the names of 3 lawyers. He said, I took it from my cousin who works for Perth City Council. He works in contracts and he knows all about franchising. So what do you say? He was convinced that he'd taken the best advice he wanted to take. But as a rule of thumb, don't sign any paperwork related to your franchise business until you've taken paid professional advice.
Yeah, that's excellent. It's and do your due diligence, as you said before. Talk to, because the franchisor has to give you a list of existing and previous franchisees?
Yes. The franchisor, if you request it, will give you a list of existing and previous franchisees. But generally, it is better that you take the counsel of those franchisees independently. You can walk around shopping centres down the high street, pop into whichever brand it is you're considering, and say, "Is the owner here?" and make time to speak to them. And you'll find out you'll get granular information from them that you wouldn't hear from anybody who's been prepared to give you the good news story. And you want a cross section, because not everybody in every brand is happy, and you want to hear the good and the bad before you make your decision.
Yeah, and it's true. To be fair to the franchisors, you can get a franchisee who could stuff up any business.
Absolutely. Yeah, look, absolutely. And people do say, "Oh, why do these franchises fail?" On many, many occasions, it's the operator. It's the operator, and the fact that they have decided to move away from the model. They've decided to create their own model within the model, and they've decided not to follow the system that they paid to get into in the first place.
Yeah, I did some work some years ago with a company or a business that helped business owners turn their businesses into franchises.
Okay.
And he used to say that the most difficult thing for the business owner is to get, or for the franchisor, is to get good franchisees. People, how do you pick people that will make a good franchisee? And he said the ideal franchisees are retired airline pilots, because all they're going to do is read the manual and follow the rules.
Follow the protocols. That's very true. Franchisors now, and certainly over 10 years, I've seen a change in the position. 10 years ago, there were certain brands where you would go through 4 stages before you got anywhere near one of their businesses. You'd have an online application. You'd then have a telephone interview. You'd then sit an online numerical and verbal reasoning test, and then you would get an interview with a general manager. And that's before you get to make an offer and take on a store. And they were unique. They were very selective about their franchisees. And the outcome of that is they had franchisees who stayed for the long term and many who owned not just one store but were multi-site operators. There was also a tranche that would get you on board so long as you had a checkbook and could afford the business. And, as a judicious buyer, you need to do your homework and make sure that the system has tested you and that you've tested that system before you commit to it.
Absolutely. And the other thing I tell anyone who's thinking of getting into a franchise is investigate how you can get out of it or how you can sell it. Some franchisors are really happy for franchisees to sell their franchises if they've been doing well because it increases the value of the brand. And, of course, for a franchisor, it's all about the brand.
Absolutely. Yes.
So a really good franchisor will have a process to help franchisees sell their businesses. But it's not always the case.
No, it isn't the case. And the sector's huge. So, one of the pitfalls for people, prospective buyers of a franchise is there's so much choice. When you have this embarrassment of riches when you're looking at other different brands, it's hard to decide which one's for you. The sector's enormous. So we're talking about 182 billion turnover within the franchise sector in Australia.
Wow. 400,000
plus employees and over 80,000 units. So that's stores, sites, businesses that are running. So it's an enormous sector. It's really critical, therefore, that you do your research and make sure that you are a good fit for the business and the business is a good fit for you. It's not a short-term agreement. As a minimum, you'll be signing a 5-year agreement with an option for a further 5 years. If you're buying some of the bigger brands, it's a 10-year franchise agreement.
Yeah.
So it's a long-term commitment, and it's not one that you can walk away from easily.
That's right. That's why I say always investigate how you can get out of it before you get into it.
We say that when we hold our buyers seminars, we often say start with the end in mind. Know how you want to leave and when you want to leave before you commit to buying that business.
Yeah, I say that to every business owner.
Yes. And I've seen people 6 months into their journey in franchising come back to my office and say, can you get me out? And the honest answer is no. You've been there 6 months. There's nothing to sell at that stage.
That's right.
You've got plant and equipment value and zero goodwill. So if you've spent 600,000, I'd be lucky to get you half, maybe a third of that if you go to sale before you've proven that the business works.
Yeah, it's a shame. Again, it comes back to that due diligence and talking to other franchisees. And like I know of a case where people bought a franchise thinking it was going to be all roses and then found out that they were going to They had to open 7 days a week because of shopping centre rules.
Yes.
It was difficult to employ staff at weekends and expensive because you had to pay penalty rates and then you're paying a high rent. And so they was working 7 days a week and struggling to make enough money to keep themselves.
It's a common situation, John. People fall in love with the idea of owning, as an example, a coffee shop. The realization that it's a 7-day-a-week operation, that you have to be there at 6 a.m. to set up, to turn the coffee machine on, to start trading at 7 a.m. The fact that you have to clean up at the end of the day, you have to order stock for the next day and you have to do your prep for the next day. And if you get 2 absentees because of sickness amongst your staff, then you're covering for the rest of the day or the week. It sort of doesn't occur to anyone until they've done that due diligence and thought, oh, good Lord, maybe the cafe isn't the right business for us because we only want to work Monday to Friday. In which case I'd say, look, the shopping centre is not for you, but perhaps a business in the CBD could be the right one for you.
Yeah.
It's a 5-day-a-week operation. It's quite clean, business hours, and you're on your way. Maybe that's better suited than this business that you've seen at one of the new shopping centres.
Yes. There are some franchises in the printing game that I know the franchisees, and they've done very well. And they're well looked after. And they can sell when it comes to time for them to exit.
Yes.
But, it comes back to doing your homework.
It does. And look, the burden of doing that homework is very much with the buyer. The franchisor can provide information, but the buyer must conduct its own due diligence.
Yeah.
As a broker, I collate information on behalf of my client, the vendor, the seller, but it's always on the proviso, and I have a very clear disclosure statement at the front to say you must conduct your own research into this business.
Yeah.
We give you no guarantees. No franchisor gives guarantees that you're going to make money. It's entirely incumbent on you to sit with your accountant, to do a cash flow projection, to create a business plan, and to ensure that you've got KPIs to hit when you're in that business, which will deliver financial success. Absolutely no guarantees.
No. And don't rely on your cousin who works for the public service.
Don't rely on that guy in contracts at Perth City Council to review your franchise agreement.
So that's buying and getting into a franchise.
Yes.
Anything else you want to say on that before we talk about selling and getting out?
Yeah, just with buyers, I think it's really important to say that whilst investing in any business has a risk, there is legal protection in place for franchisees. Both franchisors and franchisees are bound by the Franchise Code of Conduct, and that's regulated by the ACCC. So every franchisor has some stipulated processes that it must complete when onboarding someone and exiting someone. So it is important as part of your homework that you don't just depend on your accountant and your lawyer, that you do take advantage of the free advice. Franchise Council Australia is a great first point to contact. Their website has a huge amount of information for franchisees. The Small Business Development Corporation here in William Street, again, offer a free business workshops. You can attend free of charge. Huge experience and expertise within that office setup. And then again, you've got other sources like the Franchise Research Institute that you can contact. They have profiling tools. So you can profile yourself using one of their tools to understand whether or not franchising is for you, whether you're suitable for franchising or not.
That's a very good point, because you don't want entrepreneurial people getting into a franchise.
No, absolutely not, because they create another ecosystem within that system. And that's where it crumbles, and that's where you end up with franchisors either terminating a franchise agreement or the franchisee leaving empty-handed. So highly entrepreneurial people, you're much better off running your own business and exercising your own genius in your own field, not in the franchisors.
Yeah. So that profiling is a important part.
Some franchisors do it, some don't. You yourself as a potential franchise buyer can, through the Franchise Research Institute, conduct your own profiling exercise to assess yourself.
Yeah, to see if you're suitable.
Absolutely.
Fits with your personality and your style. Absolutely. So anything else on the buying side, Rajiv?
I think, again, on the buying side, if you're buying a new business, so if you're opening a brand new store,
a virgin franchise.
Yes, a greenfield, as the industry term is. Look, it is entirely based on your business plan and your projections. The franchisor will give you anonymized data from 5 or 6 other stores. No locations, etc. given, just to give you an idea of the cross-section of performance in those businesses. You have to sit with an experienced franchise accountant and map out your own business and the journey it's likely to go through. Important to do that. So you buy the business with no goodwill. So the money you pay is purely for the brand, the system, the training, and the fit-out of that store. If you're buying an existing business, you should look at least 3 years' worth of history if it's an existing business, particularly now in this period post-COVID.
Oh, yes.
The 2020 is clearly an anomaly. You have to take that year out. So I'd go back as far as 2018, 2019, 2020, and 2021. I'd look at the 4 years and then try and average out where the business sits and look at the recovery of that business post-COVID.
Yes, good point. The effect of COVID on the financials. So you need to do a bit more homework.
Look, you do, and it's interesting because some of my clients, I look at them, they've got huge amounts of money sitting in their bank account now because of all the various government payments that came in. But when I'm assessing a business for sale, I have to take those out because they don't form part of the maintainable earnings of that business. There's no guarantee of any subsidies next year. So I take those out. Then you get a genuine picture. So don't be lulled into comfort looking at how good 2020 was. Look at the details of 2020 and what the source of that income was. Was it sales or was it government booster payments?
Yeah. That's a very good point. It's And I've seen that with people telling me they've got a really good business and they want to sell now. And when you look at it, a big percentage of the income has been handouts from the government.
Absolutely right.
So makes it difficult, but the handouts have been useful.
There have been for some businesses. They've done very well. They've retained their employees. They've managed to do work in store, and because people can't travel, people have invested a lot of money in their homes, in their gardens, and in their luxuries.
Yeah, so some businesses have done well now, but it'll be interesting when things open up again. And you know, the point you make is you need to work out what working capital you're going to need.
Absolutely, yes.
And what the cash flow projections are going to be.
Actually, I'll make that point, John. So when you are buying an existing business, you'll see that price on the brokers like me. We have various ads on the internet, and it will say, as an example, $1 million plus stock at value. And quite often the idea that a buyer has is that, well, that's my buying cost. It's $1 million plus 20 grand in stock or 50,000 in stock. It isn't. There are buying costs on top of that. And it's really important when you're looking at the information memorandum that an agent or a broker has sent to you that all the costs involved have been disclosed to you. The broker has a duty of care to ensure that you're aware of all the costs before you get into this. Now, the things that you need to consider are stamp duty. It's on a sliding scale. You can go onto the government website and work out how much stamp duty you need to pay and how much money you need to keep aside. You need to pay for your lawyer. You need to pay for your accountant. You'll have to pay for the franchisor's lawyer. The franchisor, when they issue their franchise document, will also send you an invoice for the legal costs attached.
Yep.
You need to pay a bank guarantee to the landlord. Now, if you're in a shopping centre and the rent is $300,000 a year, let's say, for example, you will need to provide 3 months' rent plus the first month's rent in advance. And the landlord keeps that until you leave the premises, until you've sold up and you're moving out. So when you add all this, you probably need another 15% or so on top of your purchase price. Quite often, this isn't disclosed to buyers until the last minute, and then there's a panic. Where do we find this extra money?
Very good point. Yeah, and some working capital can be enormous. Labour hire businesses.
Absolutely. And businesses are sold as seen. So you could walk into your cafe tomorrow and find that the dishwasher's broken down or the grill isn't working. So there's another couple of $1,000s on the first day, or if it's your Impinger, this sort of high-tech, super fast ovens that they have in cafes now, could be up to $20,000.
Yep.
So you need to have some working capital set aside. So budget very carefully. Don't go to the maximum of your budget to buy the business and leave yourself short of working capital or money to put back into the business.
Absolutely. All right, so let's switch it around and talk about selling now.
Okay.
So there's, again, selling a franchise is similar to selling a business if the franchisor allows it. When do you involve the franchisor if you're thinking of selling?
Look, most franchise agreements give the franchisor the first right of refusal on that business. So when a franchisee contacts me with a view to selling their business, once I've done the assessment and given them my opinion on market value, I will say, let me know if you wish to list. If they do decide to go ahead and list at that stage, I'll say to them, here's a template. You need to fill this in and send it to your franchisor saying, 1, that you're selling, 2, that you've appointed a broker, and 3, at this stage you'd like to offer them the right to exercise the first right of refusal. The vast majority of franchisors don't like to run a store because it means their staff are then committed. Instead of being out there helping and training and developing franchisees, they're then running a store on site. So normally they will write back and say, thank you, but no.
Sometimes it's in the contract, isn't it? The agreement that the franchisor has to have first right of refusal?
Almost always. The franchisor has in the franchise agreement the first right of refusal.
Yeah.
Now, the two scenarios that play out are either they'll say, thank you, John, we're not interested, good luck with the sale, or they'll say, let us know once you've got an offer and then we'll consider opposition.
Okay. Yes, I haven't come across that one.
I'll tell you where that's happened. There's a huge South African chicken brand that went through a phase about 5-6 years ago where they decided that they didn't want to have franchise stores. They wanted to run them as company stores. So they started buying, at the end of the franchise agreements, they started buying back stores from franchisees. And that's a classic scenario of a franchisor saying, actually, we want to exercise our first right of refusal. We're not going to give you a further term. We want to buy the store back and we'll pay you whatever is deemed to be fair market value.
Okay, that's an interesting one. Yeah, I know a few franchisors that have bought the occasional franchise back for various reasons.
Yes.
But okay, so again, as the seller, what's the first thing I need to do?
Prepare your business for sale.
Okay.
That sounds huge, doesn't it? It sounds so generic, but it has a number of steps, and this is where you specialize, John. So I won't take up the airtime on this, but when a client comes to me, I would expect them to have the last 4 years' financial statements. I'd expect them to have a clear plan of what is their current lease term, what is the option to renew if there is one, information on the staff and the transferables, any debt that's carried over. This particularly affects businesses like gyms where there could be $200,000 worth of capital equipment that is on hire purchase or on lease. So all these material facts I need to know at the outset when I'm assessing the value of that business and the market value of that business.
Sure. It's it seems obvious to us, but it's not obvious to the seller.
And I don't know how you find this, but I'm quite often horrified how few franchisees have immediate access to their financial statements. Quite often I'll get an email saying, great, got your list of information that you need, be in touch in a couple of weeks. I need to go to see my accountant.
Yeah, well, it happens even in other non-franchise businesses. It horrifies me these days where it's so easy to keep your financials up to date with cloud-based accounting apps and all of that. It's just so easy, and yet you ask for the financials and it's like, oh, it'll take me a couple of months, or I'm getting the bookkeeper to get it up to date.
That's right. That's right.
It's frightening.
It makes it very challenging.
You can't run a business if you don't know what's happening with your financials.
You can't, and I think not all franchisors take a monthly P&L from their a profit and loss statement from their franchisees. In those brands, in those groups in particular, it's very difficult because nobody's tracking the financial performance of that business. All they're looking at is the turnover, because the franchisor takes a royalty on the turnover, not on the bottom line figure. Yeah. So there's no value in going through. It's perceived there's no value in going through the whole P&L. The turnover's fine. We get that via telemetry from your till, so we know what you've turned over.
Yeah.
For me, it's really critical that you have those financial statements at hand and that you're able to speak with some conviction about the journey of your business.
Yeah. I mean, I beat business owners up about knowing their numbers,
Yes.
If you don't know your numbers, how can you make decisions in the business?
Very true.
So, but yeah, and then again, it depends on the franchisor, as you say, as to how much of it they do and provide and so on. But
I think that's probably one area of franchisee training that is underrepresented, which is that financial literacy. When you buy the business, you can be a great retailer, you can have great customer relationships and provide a great standard of service and product. One of the areas that you don't get a lot of development in is that grasp of the numbers that make up your business. And every now and then I come across a client who has an absolute grasp of their numbers, and I can't help but be blown away that they can tell me that this month they're projecting a 15% increase in turnover versus this time last year. And I said, how do you know that? I said, because I do a month-on-month comparison and I look at last year versus this year. I think that's great. You know your year-on-year figures. You know exactly where this business is going.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, well, we can...
So knowing your numbers is the first stage.
Keep telling people about that.
It's critical when you come to sell. The other part with franchises is that you must be at a stage in your lease where there is some value in selling that business. I seldom will take on a business with any less than 3 years on its lease. And the simple reason for that is when a buyer goes to the bank to get a loan, the loan is always over the period of the remaining lease term.
Yeah.
And nobody is going to pay back their loan in its entirety and make some money in 3 years.
Yeah.
So you need to have renewed your lease and you need to have completed any refurbishment that's required. Another area that we should talk about actually is that with most franchises, at the end of every lease term, there is a refurbishment of the store involved.
Absolutely, yes.
And it's not cheap.
No.
It ranges anywhere from $100,000 and to WA's largest coffee chain can be upwards of $200,000 and $300,000 for a full store refurb.
Yes, I know Telstra stores and Optus stores, because of all the technology involved, when they bring out a new, forgot the term.
New brand, new logo.
Well, it's just a new shop fit out. Then the franchisee has to do that every so often. I've even had a case where in a shopping centre, a Telstra store, their rent went up because their turnover went over a certain point as well. So, I mean, I don't know why I brought that up, but it's just you've got to be...
There are technicalities, I think, that you need to be fully aware of. And I will always say to my tenant, look, you've got a year left on your current lease, unless you've got an option to renew, which is non-existent in a shopping centre. You never get an option to renew. You get a fixed term. And my suggestion is always stay, finish your term, refurb the store, sign a new lease. That's the perfect time to go onto market because you now have a turnkey solution for a buyer.
Yeah.
They walk into a brand new store with a brand new lease. That's when you realise market value. Selling a business with a year on the lease before you've done the refurb, in essence, and I say this respectfully, it's almost a fire sale.
Typically these days, are the leases in the franchisors?
Less and less so. In the past, the franchisor would always hold the head lease and then provide a license to operate to the franchisee. Increasingly over the last 5 years, more and more franchisors say, actually, we don't want the responsibility of the lease. It means that we need to have a leasing team, we need to have somebody on the ground, we need to go negotiate. Now they're saying, you, John, are the franchisee, you take the lease, we have one leasing person in the office or a small leasing team, they will help you negotiate with the landlord. But the lease is in your name. So you carry the responsibility of that lease, you carry the responsibility of making the rent payments, and you carry the responsibility of meeting all the landlord's requirements.
I know of one of these 24/7 gym businesses that the franchisee not only had the lease, but they also leased all the equipment. So all the equipment was leased to them as well. And funnily enough, the company that did the leasing was the same company that owned the franchise.
Oh, that's interesting.
I don't know if that's still the case.
I don't know if
years ago.
I'm not legally qualified or trained, but it sounds like there could be some kind of conflict of interest there, potentially anyway. Look, gyms do involve a huge capital investment, and most 24-hour gyms have a mandate for franchisees that your cardio equipment needs to be upgraded every 5 years and your weights equipment every 10. At the end of the first 5-year term, there's usually some kind of upgrade, refurb to be done to the premises because of the wear and tear in a gym.
Yeah.
And it's important franchisees accumulate the funds to make that refurb each year leading up to that 5th year.
Okay. So, again, do your homework.
Do your homework. Look, it shouldn't frighten anybody, but it should encourage everybody to be prepared for what they're getting into.
So once we get into selling, and so you've agreed the price with the franchisee, and the business goes on the market.
Yeah, I'll just, if I may, John, just interject at that stage.
Please.
So when I do an assessment on a business, somebody wants to sell, the first thing that I do is say, look, I'm happy to do an assessment on that business. The information you give me is confidential. I don't discuss it with anybody else. I'll come back to you with my opinion. So I don't give you a guarantee on that price, but I'll do the market research.
Yeah.
I'll look at other gyms, other cafes that have sold in the same brand or similar brand, their turnover. I'll compare it to yours, and I'll give you a pretty good idea of where your business should be listed for sale and what price it should be listed for sale. At that stage, quite often the franchisee is disappointed because a lot of people perceive that they paid $600 to get into the business 5 years ago. It's worth $600 today. It's an absolute misnomer. The market changes, and what you paid 5 years ago or 2 years ago has absolutely no relationship with what you get today.
Yeah.
Brand value changes. You know, there are brands that were at the peak 5 years ago that today you can't get lending against.
Yeah. And COVID's affected.
Of course, and COVID's affected things too. So really important that when you're given advice or an opinion on a listing price. If you're not happy, speak to your franchisor, ask about other businesses that they're aware of that have sold and what kind of range they've sold in. And because somebody got $1 million in New South Wales or in Queensland, it doesn't equate to you getting $1 million in Perth.
It's a shame, but that's the truth. Yeah.
Yes.
So what's the process then? Once
I've met with a client, given them my opinion, they decide whether they want to list with me. And if they do, my first step, having agreed fees and having signed a listing agreement, which authorizes me to represent that owner, I collect all the information that a buyer, their accountant, and their lender needs at the outset. So I collect everything in the beginning, and it's onerous. I send a 2-page list to my clients. Quite often I get a phone call to say, what the hell is all this? Yeah. And I'll say very, very, very honestly, that's all the information that an accountant and a lender are going to ask for. I'd rather get it now than ring you in 3 or 4 weeks' time and you have to rush home to go dig up these documents.
Yeah.
I won't get started until I've got all that information. Once I've got that, I compile an information memorandum or a business profile. That is a document that is your silent salesperson for your business.
And that's, it's so important. I tell sellers that they've got at least 3 sales to make. They've got to sell someone on buying the business, then they've got to sell their accountant, and then they've got to sell whoever's lending the money if they're borrowing, the buyer's borrowing money. So having all that information together, you're absolutely right.
Yes. It's critical to have it at the beginning. There's nothing more frustrating for a business owner than the agent calling up in the middle of the day and saying, John, can you rush home and get me your last 2 quarters BAS statements? It wouldn't sit well. So we take everything in the beginning. We build the IM, and once the IM has been built, we send it to the vendor, to the client, for them to review the draft and to approve it. Then I send it to the franchisor. As the agent, I need to engage with the franchisor at the outset, not contact him in 3 months' time when I've got a buyer and say, oh, by the way, I'm John's agent and I've got a buyer for you. Who are you? We've never heard of you. So I make contact at the beginning. I get them to give me their perspective on the document, ensure they're happy with the branding, and then I start marketing both locally and nationally.
And do you disclose how much do you disclose when you're doing your marketing? I mean, the thing I always found challenging with broking was you've got to put enough information out to attract a buyer. Correct. But without the buyer being able to determine what the business is.
Look, it's a really subjective issue. Some of my clients don't want any publicity. They don't want their staff to know. They don't want their customers to know. Others say, no, I'm happy for it to go on the market. I'm happy to talk to my staff up front and tell them that it could take 6 months or a year and that anybody who buys the business will want the staff. I play it by ear. I give an opinion, but I let the client ultimately decide whether they want their brand and their location showing. I have to say, of late, most of my clients prefer the location to be anonymous until I've got a confidentiality agreement in place.
Yeah, absolutely. It does vary. I had one seller who actually put a notice in her shop window saying business for sale, contact John Denton, and here's the mobile number.
Okay. Look, for a small business, it could work. Generally, if you've got a big brand in a good location, the last thing you want is a for sale sign in the door and 5 different people asking your teenage staff about the business.
Yeah, it's always a question I get asked is, so when do I tell my staff? When do I tell my suppliers?
Yes.
When do I tell my clients, my best clients? And things like that. And, of course, with the franchise, you've got the extra challenge there of when do I let the franchisor know as well.
True.
So, yes, all very interesting.
And ideally, if your broker's experienced in this sector, they can hold your hand. They should guide you through this process. When do I tell the staff? When should I talk to the franchisor? What's the best thing for me to do? And I always say, look, you have the option of not showing your brand in your location, but it's selling a secret.
Yeah.
There's a lot more to be had by at least having the logo of the brand on the advert, so that somebody will recognize it as being brand A, B, or C in the coffee section or in the submarine sandwich sector, so you know exactly what you're dealing with, and that generates inquiry.
Yeah.
And be prepared to invest in the sale of your business. To build a good information memorandum, a broker should be spending anywhere from 7 to 10 hours putting that together. reading it, reviewing it, and ensuring it's accurate. The marketing the broker should be using anywhere between 5 and 10 national websites.
Okay.
And all of this has a cost attached. Very few brokers are in a position to cash flow that for you. So be prepared to invest in that sales stage of your business. It's critical to you.
Absolutely.
And to getting a sale.
Yeah. So, putting all that together takes time.
Takes time, and it has to be managed, because once the marketing starts, the inquiry comes in, and it's the job of the broker and his staff in his office to screen the calls, to take details, to get the confidentiality document out. If it isn't returned, to follow that up, then to send the information memorandum, and then to follow that up. So there could be 5 or 6 contacts with an individual before you provide them with an information. And all of that is time.
Yeah.
And that has to be paid for. So be prepared as a seller to invest in the sale of your business. If you're getting that for free, you need to ask some questions.
Yeah. Sellers don't realise often just how much work there is involved in dealing with potential buyers and inquiries.
Yeah. Look, and you're paying me as a broker to screen.
Yeah.
You're making sure you're paying me to ensure that I only send people forward to the franchisor that I know the franchisor will approve. It's pointless me saying, look, John, I've sent 10 people to meet your franchisor if they've all been declined.
Yeah.
So I want to ensure that when I interview somebody and I have that discussion about the business and they decide they're interested, that they will be approved by the franchisor, because the franchisor has the right to say no to a buyer.
That's why a lot of brokers won't take on franchises.
I'm amazed. I'm amazed by that. I think because I have a system and I'm experienced in it, I think it's actually quite straightforward. You build a relationship and you work with them. But for a lot of brokers, because of the time it takes to sell a franchise business, the cycle is too long.
Yeah.
I can do, a broker can do an A to B transaction in a month, maybe in 2. My longest ever franchise sale took me 18 months to get paid. Not because anything I did. The sale was a franchise on Rottnest Island. So I had the sale, I had the contract, I had the deposit in my trust account, but it took the island authority almost 12 months to agree to the lease.
Of course it would.
So, 18 months to get paid is a long time. And in that time, you're managing the buyer and keeping their interest. And you're keeping the seller motivated, because if that business performance dips during that period, the buyer is not going to pay what they agreed to at the outset.
Yeah. So much can change in that
and
time.
All that time has to be paid for.
Yeah. 2 more questions and
of
then
course.
We'll wrap up. One, that information memorandum document, when I was business broking, the first firm I was with made that part of the contract and made the buyer and the seller both initial every single page to say that they'd read it and understood it. The seller was saying, yes, this is accurate and correct, and the buyer was signing it to say, I've read it and understood it. Do you know anybody else who does that, or do you?
I do that. So when I don't make it part of I make it part of my listing agreement with the vendor, with the seller client. So when I prepare that IM, I send it to them, and I send it to them with a document in my office that we call the Form 6, which is basically a sign-off from the vendor, from the owner, saying this is an accurate reflection of my business and this contains all the information that I have provided to the broker.
Yeah.
So they agree to that at the outset. Now, with the buyer, caveat emptor, buyer beware. The buyer must conduct its own due diligence. I offer no warranties, and no seller offers any warranties to the buyer. The buyer has to conduct its own due diligence, financial and legal, on that business. I quite often will get somebody say to me, look, I'm buying that coffee shop at such and such a shopping centre. What assurances can you give me that David Jones won't move out? So, well, absolutely none. I have no idea what David Jones's plans are for that shopping centre. But what I suggest you do is get your lawyer to contact centre management and ask them. It's part of your due diligence.
Yeah.
I work for the seller. I'm here to assist the buyer, but I work for the seller. The seller must have its own team. And the buyer must have his or her own team. And that's an accountant, a franchise experienced accountant, a franchise experienced lawyer, and a commercial finance broker. That's the team that every buyer needs. You need those 3 elements in order to be successful in buying a business.
Absolutely. And finance, is it easier to get finance for a franchise business over a non-franchise business?
Look, it's a mixed bag. At the moment I hear that the mortgage market is through the roof. I find with business lending, it's still pretty tough going. If you have 50% deposit, the finance broker that I've used for the last 10 years will still say to me, I'll do my best, but it's a 50-50. The appetite for lending to business is not as strong as the appetite for lending to the homes.
Yeah.
So consequently, I always say to my buyer clients, please don't go to the bank direct. The vast majority of previous clients who've gone to the bank direct have been declined simply because they haven't been prepared. A commercial finance broker who's experienced in commercial lending will help you prepare a business plan. They will refer you to your accountant to prepare a cash flow, and then they will silently test the banks before they submit an application. That immediately reduces the chances of a decline. And please, buyers, keep in mind, if you get declined for finance, it does sit in your credit history.
Right.
Okay,
yeah.
so don't take it lightly and don't rush to appoint a person to secure your finance for you. Choose a commercial finance broker. They are a very different animal to a mortgage broker or a general lender.
Absolutely.
And there are many of them, and many of them who are excellent at what they do. Commercial finance brokers are the way to get lending for business.
Fantastic. So many potential buyers, start by going to their bank.
I quite often will say in an initial conversation, so how are you going to fund this purchase? Oh, I've got an agreement in principle with my bank.
Yep.
I know immediately that's nonsense. You cannot get an agreement in principle to go out and buy a business that you haven't seen, where the bank hasn't seen the financials and the bank hasn't. Somebody in personal lending may have said, look, John, you've got a bucket load of cash in this bank, so if you wanted a business loan, we'd probably consider it. That is not an agreement in principle. That's somebody being kind to you. Use a commercial finance broker. Their services are free of charge. They are paid by the lender when your loan is agreed.
Fantastic. Before we wrap up, anything else you want to say about selling that we haven't covered?
About selling? Look, you have options when you're selling. You can sell it yourself, which is probably the lowest cost way of doing it. You must ensure, however, one, you've got a confidentiality document in place. Don't send your financials to people that you don't know without a confidentiality document. It could be a neighbor. It could be your employee who wants to see how much money you're making. Could be anybody. Yeah. Two, make sure you have the time to respond to every inquiry that comes through. If you miss an inquiry, that could be your buyer that goes down the road and buys something else. And three, make sure that you follow a due process, that you provide financials on the basis that they're being reviewed by the buyer and the buyer's taking advice, and also be clear that this person must be somebody that will meet your franchisor's criteria. You could spend 3 months sending information and helping somebody only to find out they don't meet your franchisor's criteria. Most franchisors will insist that your buyer is either a citizen or a permanent resident or has a business investment visa. Check.
Yep. Fantastic advice. Okay, Rajiv, if people want to contact you, how can they go about contacting you?
You can Google Ardent Business Sales. I have an office on Canning Highway in South Perth. I'm also on LinkedIn, so I'm very easy to reach, and I'm local. And a chat over the phone is free of charge.
If you're thinking of getting into or out of a franchise, then give Rajiv or myself a call. And if anyone wants to contact me and talk about buying, selling businesses, getting businesses ready for sale, then it's johndenton.com.au or john@johndenton.com.au, which is pretty easy.
It's great branding
to remember. So just in closing, I'd just like to thank once more Liberty Flexible Workspaces for allowing us to use this fantastic equipment that they've got here to record this podcast. And if you want to know more about Liberty Flexible Workplaces, then go to weareliberty.com.au. So thank you, Rajiv. It's been great. We could talk a whole lot longer.
Thank you, John. I suspect we could. It's been very enjoyable. Thank you. It's actually, it just opens up so many more areas that we could discuss.
Yeah.
Another time
we'll cover another topic. So thanks, Rajiv.